Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Overeaters Anonymous Special Focus Recovery from Relapse meeting. Today is Tuesday, the 29th of March, 2022, and we're absolutely delighted to have our speaker, Sam M., with us today. Sam is from Nottingham and now living in Manchester, and Sam came into OA in January 2014. So now it's over to Sam to share her experience, strength, and hope.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm a compulsive overeater. Paul, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm using the pronouns they, them today, just to let everybody know I'm gender fluid. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you for asking me to speak today. So this time in OA, I've just celebrated 8 years of recovery this time round. But I actually came to OA before 8 years and thought I got recovery and thought I left and relapsed and then came back, and I'll talk to you about that. Before I do, I just want to share a picture of me when I was bigger and just qualify. So let me just share this, if you can see that. So my weight release in that time has been about 70 pounds, which is 5 stone and 32, around about 32 kilos. That is not a picture of me at my biggest. I couldn't find a picture with me at my biggest because I refuse to have photographs taken. I have always been a compulsive overeater. I'm a casual overeater. I'm a binge eater. I would graze and I would think about food from the moment that I woke up to the moment I went to sleep. And my eating started from a really young age. And actually, I'm going to say this might be controversial, but food is not a problem for me. It's never been a problem for me. Food was my solution. Life was a problem for me. And I didn't know how to cope with life. And I used food to deal with stuff. And I don't regret that at all. I don't regret that at all. And I think the reason that I'm still alive today is because I'm a compulsive overeater. So I grew up in a really turbulent, violent, challenging home. I grew up in poverty. My biological father, was in and out of prison. He was physically violent. My mum gave birth to me when she was 17 and never had enough money to feed us both. So what she would do is she would prepare a meal and I would eat that meal. And if I left any of that meal, she would then eat that meal. So my mum was painfully underweight when I was a child. And when it got to the point where I was probably 4 or 5 and my mum started working part-time and there was more money coming into the home, what happened is food equaled love. So my mum didn't want us to go without. She wanted to feed us up. I'm the oldest of 3. And food would be celebration. Food would be given to us if we'd hurt ourselves or injured ourselves, or we were upset, or there was emotional turmoil. And there was so much of that. We moved around a lot when I was a child. I went to lots of different schools. There was lots of challenges and issues in my childhood, and it was a really turbulent time. So using food was a way that I soothed my emotions. And I wasn't overweight as a child. And I got to about the age of 15 and I thought that I was overweight, and I discovered diets. And at the age of 15, I started meal replacement shakes. And the meal replacement shakes, I was supposed to mix this powder with milk, and I mixed the powder with water. And I did that breakfast and lunch, and then had a family meal in the evening after I finished school, and I lost weight and people noticed. And what started at the age of 15 was this incredible cycle of binging, extreme binging, and then desperately trying to diet to lose the weight. And I was quite successful at diet. So I would diet for maybe 3 to 6 months and I would lose some weight and people would notice. But every single diet I've ever done in my life says you can go back to eating certain foods in moderation. And I am a compulsive overeater. And just like an alcoholic that can't drink alcohol, but they can drink tea or coffee or water, there are certain foods and certain ingredients and textures of food that if I put them in my body, it causes an uncontrollable craving for more. I can't stop. I can't stop until it's all gone or until I physically feel sick. And I used to joke that I was a failed bulimic, which is an awful thing to say about myself because I could binge, but I could never make myself throw up. I could never do that. And I went on some really crazy extreme diets. At one point, I didn't eat for 2 weeks. I drank water for 2 weeks and didn't eat for 2 weeks. And throughout the whole time of doing these crazy diets, I was obsessing about the food. So I was planning what I was then going to have when I wasn't on a diet anymore. And my husband and I have been together for 18 years, 19 years, a long time, coming up to 20 years, I think, next year. So we've been together for a really long time. And so he's seen these issues with me. He's seen my problems around food, and he's seen this bizarre and extreme dieting and then just binge eating. And I remember being on a juice diet, and I decided that juicing fruit somehow wasn't a good thing. So I was juicing vegetables. And I ran out of vegetables to juice, and I was juicing onions. And I remember him coming into the kitchen and being like, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is insanity. And I was so defensive and aggressive and angry, and how dare you interfere with my dieting? And it's perfectly okay and normal and natural to drink onion juice. And he said, you're going to throw up, you're going to vomit. And I said, no, of course I won't. And I drank this onion juice and I just threw up, involuntarily threw up all over the floor. And he just looked at me in like, I don't know, like shock, horror. And he said, you're cleaning that up. He just walked out. And then I cleaned up all of this sick. I did some really awful extreme things to my body. And my mum is an alcoholic, and she actually became an alcoholic a bit later on in my life when I was a teenager. I come from a long line of alcoholics and drug addicts and people that have got issues with substances. And she became an alcoholic, and she doesn't mind me sharing about this. She's actually celebrating 12 years of recovery tomorrow. So it's her birthday tomorrow, her birthday tomorrow. She doesn't mind me talking about this. But my mum would take super strength lager and drink it in secret and then hide the cans. And I would do the same with food. So I would buy like a ginormous cake or huge quantities of my trigger foods, and I would binge eat them in secret. And then I would hide the wrappers or hide half empty things around my house. And I would eat pretty normally in front of friends and other people. But when I was on my own or in secret, I would just eat those vast quantities of food. And it was a normal day for me would be waking up and nibbling on whatever I could eat in the kitchen, then sitting down and having breakfast, then picking food while I was getting ready for work. Then I would get in my car and I would eat something in my car on the way to work. And then I would, in the office, make myself some breakfast as if it was the first breakfast of the day. And then usually I would have taken lunch with me. So I would eat lunch in the office, but then I would go out to McDonald's or some takeaway and eat there, and then get sweet stuff and bring that back into the office. And then I'd be hiding it in my bottom drawer in my desk and picking. So nobody really ever saw the quantities of food that I ate. And I guess my weight was never like massively excessive because I was able to diet and reduce it, and then I would binge and it would go up again. And that was my life from the age of 15 up until my late 30s. I was either gaining weight or I was losing weight. I had multiple different sizes of clothes, and I absolutely hated myself. And I think that's really important to say that. I thought that I was an awful, horrible, shocking, disgusting human being. I felt like I was just dark and sticky and damp it's the core of my soul, and that if anybody knew that about me, knew the real me, that I would be disowned. And I say that because today from this program, I sit here with self-compassion and with self-love and with a lot of love for my body and the shit that I've put it through. A lot of love and compassion. And I never, ever thought I would say that. So I came to OA. I saw my mum and the issues that my mum had with alcohol, and I recognised that my issues were the same with food. And I didn't know where OA existed, so I decided that I was going to create my own OA. I didn't know what I was going to call it. Ego Run Riot. And I started doing some searches on what I was going to call this 12-step fellowship for food, and I discovered that OA already exists. And I came to my first meeting, a face-to-face meeting, and I sat in the room with 4 or 5 other people, and I just cried the whole way through, because for the first time in my entire life, people shared about the stuff that I'd done. People shared about sucking the chocolate off dog biscuits, which is something that I'd done, and eating food from the trash, and lying and stealing and all of that stuff. And I really felt at home. And so I came to OA, and that must have been, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago. And I went to one OA meeting a week, which was the only meeting in the city that I lived in at the time. And I bought all the literature, and I read all the literature. I was very diligent in reading the literature, and I worked the tools, but not the steps. I didn't get a sponsor. I didn't work the steps. I dieted with group support. And I thought that was recovery, and that's why I'm speaking today, because I thought that was recovery, and I thought when I left OA that was my relapse. But what I realised actually is I don't know if that was ever recovery. I don't think I ever had recovery the first time round. I'd stopped engaging in my crazy food behaviours. I was eating my planned meals, and I was committing those meals to somebody, and I was doing my outreach calls, and I was going to this one meeting a week, and I even went and did like some OA workshops, but I didn't have a sponsor and I wasn't working with steps. And the people in that meeting said to me, when you put the food down, all your emotions will come up, and all the reasons why you overeat will come up. And I thought, that is a crock of shit. I was like, I'm already an emotional person. I already feel my emotions. I already cry all the time. That's not going to happen to me, and I don't need to work the steps. In fact, I'd read the steps and I'd crossed quite a lot of them out because I didn't like all of them. So I decided that when I eventually got a sponsor, I was only going to work maybe like 4 steps or 5. That's clearly going to work for me, clearly. So I think I probably did step 1 and 2 by myself, but I never really got past that. And I hear people talking about the step 1, 2, 3 limbo, doing steps 1, 2, and 3, leaving, relapsing, going back into the food, coming back, doing 1, 2, 3, going back out again, coming back. And I think that would have been my experience had I not got really, really desperate. So I put the food down, I worked the tools, which doesn't give you recovery. All of my emotions came up, and I felt like a crazy person. I was frazzled. I was crying. I was feeling shame. I was feeling guilt. I had all these like pains in my body. It was just awful. And I decided at that point that OA didn't work, and I left OA. And the shameful thing about this is when I left, I cut ties with everybody. I didn't tell anybody that I was leaving. I just left. I just never went back. I ignored all the messages that I got. I ignored the phone calls that I got. I just cut people out of my life. And I left OA, I think it was probably like March that I left. And I was getting married in October. And I bought this wedding dress that was massive. It's way too big. It was 3 sizes too big for me. It was a huge wedding dress. I bought it. It was pre-loved. It was a used wedding dress. I got a really good deal, bought this wedding dress, and had decided that I was going to lose weight and be really tiny on my wedding day, and that they would need to take loads of fabric off this wedding dress. And I went and had a wedding dress fitting, and they pinned the fabric at the side of the dress. They didn't cut it. And I said, cut the fabric, get rid of the fabric. I'm going to be tiny on my wedding day. I'm dieting. And they didn't, luckily. They just tucked it in and pinned it. And in that time that I was away from March to, it was January the following year, I lost the ability to diet. I couldn't diet. I completely lost the ability to restrict, completely lost the ability to control my food in any meaningful way. And I just got bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point where every time I went to try that wedding dress on, they had to let out more fabric. And I got married in Las Vegas, myself and my husband. It was great fun, but I spent 3 weeks eating my way around America and eating these incredible supersized portions of food. And I got to the point where I wasn't even hiding it anymore. I couldn't hide it. I couldn't wait to eat the food. I was just gorging on this food. And things like I would be asleep at night and I would wake up to food coming up the back of my throat and choking me in the night, because I'd eaten such an excessive amount that my body couldn't hold it all in. Huge amounts. And I remember one time eating so much that I threw up because it was too much. I hate throwing up. And I thought that was a great thing, because I just came back to this buffet and just ate more. It was insane. It was insanity. I had no control over it at all. As soon as I took that first compulsive bite, I was off. And when I wasn't eating, I was thinking about eating. I was planning what to eat. I was obsessing about eating, and I hated myself and I hated my body. And when we came back from 3 weeks in America, I had the worst Christmas of my life, and I got to the point where I just wanted to die. And I really believed at that point in my life that, and I truly, truly felt this in my body, that I would get to the point in my life where I couldn't get out of my bed, where I couldn't move, where I was bedbound because I was so big. And I'd accepted that as my fate. We talk about alcoholism being a killer disease. This is such a terrible addiction, food. It's such a slow killer. And I fully expected that was going to happen. And I was thinking about crashing my car, and I was thinking, how can I injure myself enough that I will be in hospital and somebody else can feed me, because I just can't trust myself around food. It was a really dark place to be in. And in the January, 8 years ago, I came back to OA, and I was so ashamed of going back to the meeting that I just ghosted, that I travelled 3 hours in my car and drove down to London and went to a meeting in London. And I arrived late and I sat at the back and I cried the whole way through, and I left a bit early so nobody would talk to me. But I knew what I needed to do. And I got a sponsor and I started working the steps. And I should say that I was not a model sponsee. I was not a model sponsee. My sponsor was very focused on the steps and working the steps through the big book. And she also used Laurie C's big book study, which I don't think is OA approved, but that's what she used. So I'm like, great, fine, that's what we're doing. She would give me work to do and I would go missing for like 2 or 3 weeks. And my food was okay, but my head was a mess. My emotions were a mess. And then I would send her a text message or contact her because I'd missed a call, and I would be like, "Are you still my sponsor? Yes or no?" And she said, "Are you willing to do the work? If you're willing to do the work, I'm willing to sponsor you." And slowly, we worked through the steps. I really struggled at step 3. I really got stuck at step 3, and I think that was the point where I could have really easily left away and not come back. And I see why people get stuck at that step. So I grew up in a fiercely anti-religious household. So to hear the word God used in 12-step fellowships was offensive to me at the time. It's not now, I use that word. I couldn't relate. I felt like it was a God squad, or it was some kind of cult. And getting to step 3, I thought, I don't have any choice. I'm going to die. I'm going to die a slow, painful, horrendous, lonely death, or I'm going to need to embrace God. That's the choice. So what's the choice going to be? I'm going to embrace God. So at step 3, I accidentally took Holy Communion in a Catholic church. It was not my intention. I enrolled on a Buddhist course. I went to a Sikh temple with a friend, and all the time felt incredibly uncomfortable. And then my sponsor at the time relapsed, and I got a new sponsor. And my new sponsor said, "Where are you in the steps?" And I said, "I'm at step 3, but I can't do this. How can I do this? I don't believe in God, and I'm all these religions, and what?" And she told me something that I think made all the difference to my recovery. She said, "Imagine that there are 3 frogs sitting on a log, and 2 of them make the decision to jump off. How many frogs are left?" Like, 1, of course, 2 jump off, 1's left. And she said, "No, 3 frogs are left." So I was like, this woman's nuts. She said they made a decision to jump. They haven't jumped yet. And she told me that step 3 was just the decision. Step 3 is just a decision. And she told me that the 12th step is having had a spiritual, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of the steps, not a result, the result of the steps. That I would, at the end of step 12, I would have a spiritual awakening and I would have a relationship with a higher power. And so step 3 was just a decision to move forward with the steps and to do step 4 and to have my own experience. And today I absolutely categorically believe that a higher power exists. Absolutely believe that a higher power exists. I've seen that power in my life. I've experienced that for myself. But I want to share a story that I heard early in my recovery about the difference between belief and trust. So I heard somebody speaking saying, imagine that you're sitting in the circus, you're in the audience of a circus, you're sitting there, you're with your friends and family, you're having a nice time, and in walks this very tall, very confident looking man into the arena. And you're sitting there comfortable in the audience and you're wondering what he's going to do. And he starts climbing up these ladders. And you realize that there's a tightrope at the top of the ladders, but there's no safety net. And you're sitting there and you think, he's probably done this hundreds, if not thousands of times before. He's safe. He's going to walk across this tightrope. And you realize he's got a wheelbarrow and he's going to push this wheelbarrow across a tightrope. And belief is sitting in the audience, feeling comfortable, observing, looking on, and believing that he'll get to the other side. But trust is getting in the wheelbarrow. And that is like the analogy of my life. I believe in a higher power. I don't always trust, right? That is a work in progress for me. So over the last 8 years in recovery, there is huge amounts of things that have happened in my life. I've dealt with infertility and not being able to have children. I've lost jobs. I've been homeless. I had a mental breakdown about 3 years ago. My youngest sister developed breast cancer at the age of 28. She was diagnosed a few weeks after her wedding day. She's okay now. And my husband, his heart stopped and he had to be resuscitated, and he has all manner of problems with his heart. And all of those things in my life, I have been held. The 12 steps don't promise that I'm not going to live a life that's perfect, isn't anything painful or a struggle, or isn't, it doesn't cause heartache. I'm going to live my life feeling all those things. The 12 step just promises that I don't have to eat over it. And today I have freedom from food obsession, complete freedom from food obsession. There is foods and textures of foods in my house right now that I don't eat, that I don't go near, and that it isn't a struggle for me. And I think we're going to read the step 10 promises later. It's not a struggle. I've not sworn off. I'm not avoiding temptation. The problem has been removed. So I would call myself a recovered, but not cured, compulsive overeater. And I think, that's me. I'll leave it there. Thanks for letting me share.